I never expected that a child's drawing would shatter everything I thought I knew about wealth, power, and the lengths some people will go to protect their secrets. My name is David Chen, and I'm a third-grade teacher at Riverside Elementary in the quiet town of Millbrook. What started as a simple art project in my classroom led me down a path that would expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of our community, put my own daughter Emma in danger, and ultimately teach me that sometimes the most innocent voices can reveal the darkest truths. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It was a Tuesday morning when I first noticed her. While my other students chattered excitedly about their weekend adventures, 8-year-old Sophie Martinez sat in the back corner, methodically shading what appeared to be another one of her intricate drawings. Sophie was different from the other kids, not just because her father owned half the businesses in town, but because of the way she carried herself with a quiet intensity that seemed far too heavy for such small shoulders. The first time I really paid attention to Sophie's artwork, I was collecting the weekly family portrait assignments. Most kids drew stick figures with big smiles, houses with crooked chimneys, and dogs that looked more like hairy rectangles. But Sophie's drawing made me stop in my tracks. She had created a detailed pencil sketch of a large house, every window precisely rendered, every shadow carefully placed. But what caught my attention wasn't the technical skill that far exceeded her age, it was what she had drawn in one of the upstairs windows. A small figure stood behind bars, and when I looked closer, I could see tears falling from the figure's face. At the bottom of the page, in her careful handwriting, Sophie had written "Mama's room" with an arrow pointing to the barred window. My stomach tightened as I studied the drawing more carefully. I had met Robert Martinez several times during parent conferences and school fundraisers. He was charming, successful, and generous with donations to our art program. His wife, according to him, was too fragile to attend school functions, suffering from some mysterious illness that kept her confined to their mansion in Oakwood Hills. I set Sophie's drawing aside and made a mental note to speak with her privately. As a teacher, I had been trained to recognize signs of trouble at home, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. The level of detail in the drawing suggested Sophie had been studying this scene for a long time, memorizing every element with the precision of someone documenting evidence rather than creating art. That afternoon, as the other children packed their backpacks and rushed toward the buses, I approached Sophie's desk. She was methodically organizing her colored pencils, each one placed in perfect order by color intensity. Her dark hair fell across her face like a curtain, hiding her expression from the world. "Sophie," I said gently, crouching down to her level. "I was wondering if you could tell me about your drawing today." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The house you drew is very detailed. She looked up at me with eyes that seemed far older than 8 years should allow. For a moment, I thought she might speak, might trust me with whatever secret she was carrying. Instead, she quickly gathered her art supplies and whispered, "My father says I have a very active imagination, Mr. Chen. Sometimes I draw things that aren't real." But her hands were shaking as she said it, and I knew with absolute certainty that what she had drawn was very, very real. The weeks that followed Sophie's disturbing drawing became a careful dance of observation and growing concern. I found myself watching her more closely during class, noting the way she flinched whenever someone spoke too loudly, how she always ate lunch alone despite other children's attempts to include her, and most tellingly, how she never seemed to have the carefree messiness that characterized most 8-year-olds. Her clothes were always pristine, her hair perfectly braided, her assignments completed with mechanical precision that spoke more of fear than diligence. My own daughter Emma, who was 9 and attended the same school, had started asking questions about why I seemed distracted during our evening homework sessions. Emma was everything Sophie wasn't: boisterous and confident, quick to laugh, and even quicker to speak her mind. Since her mother died 3 years ago in a car accident, it had been just the two of us navigating life in our small 2-bedroom apartment above Chen's family restaurant, which my parents had run for 20 years before retiring, and leaving it to me to manage alongside my teaching career. "Dad, you keep staring at your papers, but you're not actually grading them," Emma observed one Thursday evening, her own math homework spread across our kitchen table. "Is something wrong with one of your students?" I set down my red pen and looked at my daughter, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, pencil smudges on her cheek from erasing too enthusiastically. How could I explain to her that I suspected one of her classmates was living in a situation that kept me awake at night? How could I tell her that every day I sent Sophie home, I worried about what she might face behind the gates of that mansion? "There's a student who seems sad," I said carefully. "I'm trying to figure out how to help her." Emma nodded seriously, her expression taking on the mature thoughtfulness that sometimes surprised me. She had developed an old soul since losing her mother, becoming my confidant and advisor in ways that both warmed and worried my heart. "Is it Sophie Martinez?" she asked, and my surprise must have shown on my face because she continued. "She draws during recess instead of playing. Yesterday, Marcus Chen, no relation despite the name, tried to ask her to join our kickball game, and she looked like he had asked her to jump off a cliff. She's scared of something, Dad." The fact that Emma had noticed the same things I had both validated my concerns and intensified them. If a 9-year-old could see that Sophie was afraid, how had the adults in her life missed it, or worse, chosen to ignore it? The next morning, I decided to take a more direct approach. During art time, I announced that we would be working on a special project called My Safe Place. I encouraged the students to draw or paint a location where they felt completely secure and happy. As the children worked, I moved around the classroom, offering encouragement and observing their choices. Most drew their bedrooms, the school playground, or grandparents, houses filled with warm colors and smiling figures. Sophie stared at her blank paper for nearly 10 minutes before finally beginning to sketch. What emerged was not a place at all, but a person. She drew a woman with long, dark hair and kind eyes, sitting in what appeared to be a garden filled with flowers. The woman was reaching out as if to embrace someone just outside the frame of the drawing. At the bottom, Sophie wrote "Before" in small, careful letters. When I approached her desk, she quickly moved to cover the drawing with her arm, but not before I caught sight of the tears that had begun to pool in her eyes. "That's a beautiful drawing, Sophie," I said softly. "The lady looks very kind." "She was," Sophie whispered, so quietly I had to lean closer to hear her. "Before she got sick." "Is this your mother?" I asked gently. Sophie nodded, then looked around nervously to make sure none of the other students were listening. "She used to have a garden. She taught me the names of all the flowers. But then she got sick and had to stay in her room all the time. Father says the doctors need to keep her safe." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Does your mother like staying in her room?" Sophie's small hands began to tremble as she fumbled with her pencils. "She cries sometimes, late at night. But Father says that's just part of being sick. He says I shouldn't bother her because it might make her sicker." The pieces were beginning to form a picture that made me feel physically ill. A woman confined to a room, a child forbidden from seeing her mother except under controlled circumstances, and a man with enough money and influence to ensure that no one asked too many questions. I thought about Robert Martinez's charming smile during parent conferences, the way he deflected any questions about his wife with practiced ease, always redirecting the conversation to Sophie's academic performance or the school's financial needs. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. After school, instead of heading home to help my parents with the dinner rush at the restaurant, I drove to Oakwood Hills. The Martinez mansion sat behind imposing iron gates, its Tudor-style architecture meant to impress and intimidate in equal measure. From the street, I could see several upstairs windows, and my heart raced as I identified the one Sophie had drawn in her picture, complete with what I now realized might not be decorative ironwork, but actual bars. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, debating whether what I was contemplating was brave or foolish. As a single father, I couldn't afford to lose my job, and challenging someone with Robert Martinez's connections could easily result in exactly that outcome. But as I thought about Sophie's trembling hands and the word "before" written beneath her drawing, I knew I couldn't simply pretend I hadn't seen what I had seen. Just as I was about to start my car and leave, I noticed movement in the barred window. A figure appeared briefly, pressing what looked like hands against the glass. Even from a distance, I could see the person's face, and it was unmistakably the woman from Sophie's drawing. She stood there for, perhaps 30 seconds, looking out at the world beyond her prison before disappearing back into the shadows of the room. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, knowing that I had just witnessed something that confirmed my worst fears. Sophie's mother wasn't sick, she was trapped. And somehow, an 8-year-old girl was documenting her captivity through art, the only way she could cry for help without risking even worse consequences. That night, I called my sister Jessica, who worked as a social worker in the county office. Without revealing names, I described the situation and asked about protocols for investigating suspected domestic imprisonment. Jessica's response chilled me to the bone. David, cases like this are incredibly difficult to prove, especially when they involve wealthy families. If you're wrong, you could face lawsuits for defamation, harassment, and lose your teaching license. If you're right, and you move too quickly without solid evidence, the perpetrator could simply move the victim somewhere else, making rescue impossible. You need to be absolutely certain before you involve authorities. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about Sophie's drawing and the brief glimpse of her mother's face in the window. Somewhere across town, an 8-year-old girl was sleeping in a house where her mother was a prisoner, and I was perhaps the only person who understood the truth hidden in her artwork. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on me like a physical force, and I realized that tomorrow I would have to find a way to earn Sophie's complete trust. Because if I was going to save her mother, I would need Sophie's help to do it. The opportunity to gain Sophie's trust came sooner than I expected, though not in the way I had planned. It was a Friday afternoon when the spring rain began falling in heavy sheets, turning the school pickup area into chaos. Parents huddled under umbrellas while children pressed their faces against classroom windows, watching the downpour with mixture of excitement and disappointment as recess plans dissolved. I was helping students organize their weekend homework folders when I noticed Sophie still sitting at her desk, staring out at the storm with an expression that seemed far too anxious for a child watching rain. While other students chatted about puddle jumping and indoor games, Sophie's small hands were clenched in her lap, her breathing quick and shallow. "Sophie, is someone coming to pick you up?" I asked, approaching her desk as the last of the other students were collected by their families. She shook her head slightly, never taking her eyes off the storm. "Father had an important meeting. Mrs. Harrison usually drives me, but she called in sick today. Father said to wait." Mrs. Harrison, I had learned through careful questioning over the past weeks, was Robert Martinez's housekeeper and the closest thing Sophie had to a maternal figure since her mother's mysterious illness began. The fact that Sophie was stranded at school seemed to genuinely distress her, but not in the way a typical child might be upset about a delayed pickup. There was something deeper, more fearful in her reaction. "Would you like me to call your father?" I offered, pulling out my phone. "No!" The word came out sharper than Sophie had ever spoken before, and she immediately looked embarrassed by her outburst. I mean, he doesn't like to be interrupted during meetings. He gets very angry when people disturb his work. The way she said very angry made my chest tighten. I knelt beside her desk, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "Sophie, everyone gets stuck sometimes when plans change. Your father won't be angry about something that isn't your fault." But even as I said the words, I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe them. She had learned to expect anger for things beyond her control, and that realization made me want to drive straight to Robert Martinez's office and demand answers that I knew I couldn't legally obtain. "Tell you what," I said instead, making a decision that felt both natural and terrifying. "Why don't I give you a ride home? I can call your father to let him know, and that way you won't have to wait here alone." Sophie's eyes widened with something that looked like panic. "You can't come to my house," she said quickly. "Father doesn't like unexpected visitors. He says they make Mother more nervous." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Robert Martinez was isolating his family completely, controlling who could visit and when. No unexpected guests meant no witnesses to whatever was happening behind those gates. "I understand," I said carefully, "but I can't leave you here alone, and the storm is getting worse. How about this? I'll drive you to the gates, and you can call your father from there to let him know you're home safely." Sophie considered this for a long moment, clearly weighing her fear of being stranded against her fear of what might happen if I came too close to her house. Finally, she nodded reluctantly, The drive to Oakwood Hills gave me 20 precious minutes alone with Sophie, and I knew I had to use them wisely. As we sat in traffic caused by the storm, I began asking gentle questions about her artwork, her favorite subjects, anything that might help her feel comfortable talking to me. "You're a very talented artist," I said as windshield wipers fought against the heavy rain. "Have you always liked to draw?" "Mother taught me," Sophie said quietly, her voice barely audible over the storm. "She used to be an artist before she got married. She had paintings all over the house, but Father put them away when she got sick. He said they made the house feel cluttered." "What kinds of things did your mother paint?" "Gardens mostly. And birds." She said birds were symbols of freedom. Sophie's voice grew even softer. She told me that even when we feel trapped, we can always fly away in our imaginations. The metaphor was so obvious it made my heart ache. Sophie's mother had been trying to send messages through her daughter, teaching her to document their reality through art, while maintaining the pretense of imagination. "Do you still get to see your mother's paintings?" I asked. Sophie shook her head. "They're locked in Father's study now. He says they're too valuable to leave out where they might get damaged. But sometimes, when he's at work and Mrs. Harrison is cleaning, I sneak in to look at them. Mother painted one of me when I was little, before everything changed." "Before she got sick?" I prompted gently. "Before Father decided she was too fragile to leave her room," Sophie said, then immediately looked startled, as if the words had escaped without her permission. "I mean, before her illness made her need to rest so much." We had reached the gates of her neighborhood, and I could see Sophie's tension increasing as we approached her house. The mansion loomed ahead of us, its windows dark except for a few lights on the ground floor. The upstairs window with bars was barely visible through the storm, but I found myself staring at it, wondering if Sophie's mother was watching the rain from behind that glass prison. "Mr. Chen," Sophie said suddenly, her small hand reaching out to touch my arm. "Can I tell you something? But you have to promise not to tell anyone, especially not Father." I turned off the engine and gave her my full attention, knowing that whatever she was about to say would change everything. "I promise, Sophie. You can trust me." She took a shaky breath as if gathering courage for something she had never said aloud before. "Mother isn't really sick. I know everyone thinks she is, and Father tells everyone she is. But she's not. She's scared. She's been scared for a long time. And Father won't let her leave her room because he says she might tell people things that would hurt our family." The words hung in the air between us, like a confession that had been building for months, maybe years. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she continued speaking, as if a dam had finally burst. "She tries to write letters sometimes, but Father always finds them and burns them. She asked me once to draw pictures of things I see, so that someday someone might understand. She said artists have always been the ones to tell the truth when no one else could." I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that my next words would either save this child and her mother, or potentially make their situation infinitely worse. "Sophie, has your father ever hurt you or your mother?" She was quiet for so long that I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was so small I had to lean closer to hear her. "He doesn't hit us. But he doesn't have to. He controls everything. What we eat, when we sleep, who we can talk to, where we can go. Mother used to try to fight him, but now she just sits by her window and cries. And I draw pictures because it's the only way I can tell someone what's really happening." As if summoned by our conversation, the front door of the mansion opened, and Robert Martinez appeared, even from a distance looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit. But there was something about his posture, the way he stood waiting in the doorway, that radiated controlled fury. "I have to go," Sophie said, panic creeping into her voice. "He's wondering why we're sitting here so long." "Sophie, wait," I said urgently. "If you ever need help, if anything happens, you call me. Do you understand? Day or night, you call me." I quickly wrote my phone number on a piece of paper and pressed it into her small hand. She looked at it for a moment, then carefully folded it and tucked it into her shoe, a hiding place that spoke volumes about the level of surveillance she lived under. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Chen," she said formally, transforming back into the perfect, controlled child she had to be at home. But just before she got out of the car, she turned back to me with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone her age. "Mr. Chen? Tomorrow is Saturday. Father always goes to his office on Saturday mornings, and Mrs. Harrison visits her. Sister, if you happen to walk past our house around 10 o'clock, you might see something in Mother's window. Something important." She was out of the car and running through the rain toward her father before I could respond, leaving me sitting in my car, with the weight of her words pressing down on me like the storm clouds overhead. As I watched Robert Martinez place his hand on his daughter's shoulder, guiding her into the house, with what looked like gentle care but felt like ownership, I knew that tomorrow morning would bring a confrontation that could either free two prisoners or destroy any chance they had of escape. The game had changed, and Sophie Martinez had just made me a player in something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Saturday morning arrived with deceptive brightness, the storm from the previous day having cleared to reveal a crisp autumn sky that seemed to mock the darkness of what I was about to discover. I had barely slept, alternating between rehearsing what I might say to authorities and questioning whether I was reading too much into a child's imagination. But Sophie's final words kept echoing in my mind, the careful way she had told me exactly when to walk past her house, as if she had been planning this moment for weeks. I left Emma with my parents at the restaurant, telling them I needed to run some errands. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but I couldn't risk involving my family in something that might put them in danger. As I drove toward Oakwood Hills, my hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, and I found myself checking the rearview mirror more often than necessary, paranoid that I was somehow being watched. The neighborhood was quiet at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, with most residents either still sleeping or away at weekend activities. I parked 2 blocks away from the Martinez mansion and walked casually down the tree-lined street, trying to look like someone out for a morning stroll rather than a man about to potentially witness evidence of a crime. As I approached the imposing gates, I could see that Robert Martinez's black Mercedes was indeed gone from the circular driveway, just as Sophie had predicted. The house looked peaceful from the outside, its manicured gardens and pristine facade giving no hint of the secrets hidden within. But as I drew closer to the section of fence that provided the best view of the upstairs windows, my heart began racing with anticipation and dread. At first, I saw nothing unusual. The barred window that had haunted my thoughts for weeks was empty, just dark glass reflecting the morning sun. I was beginning to wonder if I had misunderstood Sophie's cryptic message when movement caught my eye. A piece of white fabric appeared in the window, waving slowly back and forth like a flag of surrender. I moved closer to the fence, using a large oak tree to partially conceal myself while maintaining a clear view of the window. The white fabric waving was clearly deliberate, and as I watched, it was joined by what appeared to be a piece of paper pressed against the glass. Even from this distance, I could see that something was written on it, though I couldn't make out the specific words. The paper remained pressed against the window for several long minutes, and I realized that Sophie's mother was giving me time to document what she was showing me. I pulled out my phone and began taking photos, zooming in as much as possible to capture the message. Through my phone's camera, I could finally make out the words written in desperate, shaky handwriting. "Help me! Prisoner! Call police." My hands were shaking so violently that I nearly dropped my phone. This was no longer a matter of suspicion or interpretation. I was looking at a direct plea for help from a woman being held against her will. But before I could take additional photos, the paper disappeared from the window and I saw a figure moving quickly away from the glass. I was about to leave when I heard the sound of a car engine approaching. Panic shot through me as I recognized the distinctive purr of Robert Martinez's Mercedes returning much earlier than Sophie had anticipated. I ducked behind the oak tree, my heart pounding as the car passed through the gates and disappeared up the driveway. Through the branches, I could see Robert Martinez getting out of his car, his face twisted with an expression of fury that made my blood run cold. He had clearly noticed something was wrong, possibly seeing his wife at the window or sensing that the routine of his carefully controlled household had been disrupted. He moved toward the house with purposeful strides, and I found myself terrified for both Sophie and her mother. I waited until I heard the front door slam before carefully making my way back to my car, my mind racing with the implications of what I had witnessed. I now had photographic evidence of a woman asking for help, but I also knew that my presence might have been detected, putting both mother and daughter in immediate danger. As I drove away from Oakwood Hills, I called my sister Jessica from the car, my voice barely steady as I explained what I had just seen. Her response was immediate and decisive. "David, you need to bring those photos to the police right now. What you've documented is evidence of false imprisonment at minimum, possibly kidnapping. But you also need to understand that once you file this report, there's no going back. Robert Martinez has connections throughout this county, and he will use every resource at his disposal to discredit you and your evidence." I thought about Sophie sitting in my classroom on Monday morning, trying to concentrate on math problems, while knowing that her weekend had been spent in a house where her mother was being punished for trying to communicate with the outside world. I thought about the drawing of the woman reaching out for an embrace that would never come, and the word "before" written in a child's careful handwriting. "Jessica, what happens to Sophie when this comes out? Where does she go if her father is arrested?" "The county will conduct a full investigation, and she'll be placed in protective custody until suitable guardians can be found. It's not ideal, but it's better than leaving her in a situation where she's witnessing ongoing abuse and imprisonment." I made the decision that would change all of our lives as I pulled into the parking lot of the Millbrook police station. Whatever consequences came from exposing Robert Martinez's crimes, they couldn't be worse than allowing Sophie and her mother to remain trapped in that house of horrors. Detective Maria Santos listened to my story with the kind of professional skepticism I had expected, but her expression changed dramatically when I showed her the photographs on my phone. The image of the desperate message pressed against the barred window was clear enough to constitute evidence, and she immediately began making calls to set up a wellness check at the Martinez residence. "Mr. Chen, I need you to understand that you may have saved 2 lives today," Detective Santos said as she prepared to leave for Oakwood Hills. "But I also need you to be prepared for the possibility that Mr. Martinez will claim his wife is mentally ill and that the message was written during a psychotic episode. Men like him don't stay powerful by being unprepared for challenges to their control." As I waited in the police station for news from the wellness check, I couldn't help but wonder if I had just set in motion Sophie's rescue or her destruction. But when I thought about her small hand reaching out to trust me with her family's most dangerous secret, I knew that some risks were worth taking, even when the outcome remained terrifyingly uncertain. The call came 3 hours later while I sat in the police station waiting room, my coffee grown cold as I stared at the clock on the wall. Detective Santos emerged from her office with an expression I couldn't read, and my heart hammered against my ribs as she approached. "We found her," she said simply. "Isabella Martinez was locked in that upstairs room, just as you suspected. The door was reinforced from the outside, and the windows had been fitted with security bars that could only be opened from the exterior. She's been held there for over 2 years. The relief that washed over me was so intense I nearly collapsed. And Sophie? Safe. She's with Child Services temporarily, but she's asking for you. Isabella Martinez has been hospitalized for severe malnutrition and psychological trauma, but she's going to recover. She told us that Sophie has been her only connection to hope all this time." Robert Martinez was arrested that evening at his office, his shocked protestations about his wife's mental illness crumbling when faced with medical evidence of prolonged captivity and abuse. The investigation revealed a pattern of financial control that had escalated to physical imprisonment when Isabella had threatened to leave him and expose his illegal business practices. 2 weeks later, I sat in a family court waiting room with Emma beside me, both of us nervous about the hearing that would determine Sophie's future. Isabella Martinez was still recovering in a specialized facility, and while she would eventually regain custody of her daughter, she needed time to heal from years of psychological trauma. "Mr. Chen?" The social worker approached with a warm smile. "Sophie would like to see you before the hearing begins." I found Sophie in a small conference room, drawing in a sketchbook that Child Services had provided. But this time, her artwork was different. Instead of documenting pain and captivity, she had drawn a garden filled with bright flowers, with 3 figures holding hands in the center: a man, a girl with braids, and a smaller girl with a big smile. "Is that your mother's garden?" I asked, sitting beside her. "No," Sophie said, looking up at me with eyes that seemed lighter than I had ever seen them. "It's the garden Mother and I are going to plant together when she comes home. And this," she pointed to the man in the drawing, "is you. Emma told me you grow vegetables behind your restaurant. Sophie, I need to tell you something important. The judge is going to ask if you'd like to stay with my family until your mother is ready to take care of you again, but only if that's what you want." Sophie set down her pencil and looked at me with the same serious expression she had worn in my classroom, but now it was tempered with something I had never seen before: hope. "Mr. Chen, when you asked if you could join me that day in the rain, you changed everything. You saw my drawings and understood what they meant. You believed me when no one else would." She paused, then smiled. The first genuine smile I had ever seen from her. "I'd like to stay with you and Emma, if that's okay. Just until Mother is strong enough to take care of both of us again." 6 months later, I stood in my small apartment kitchen watching Sophie and Emma work together on homework, while Isabella Martinez, finally free and healing, helped them with their art projects. The 4 of us had become an unexpected family, bound together not by blood but by the courage it had taken to speak truth in the face of danger. Sophie still drew every day, but now her pictures were filled with laughter, friendship, and the kind of ordinary childhood moments that I had once taken for granted. Sometimes the most important lessons come not from textbooks, but from having the wisdom to listen when a child's art becomes their cry for help. The drawing that had started it all now hung framed in our living room, not as a reminder of darkness, but as proof that even in the most hopeless situations, love and courage can create the possibility of rescue. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.